Hello, thank you for your interest in this workshop. I am Dr. Haridhan Goswami. I would like to welcome you all to Harmonizing Data on Child Wellbeing workshop. Before starting the workshop, I would like to introduce you with my two colleagues, Dr. Insa Bechert and Dr. Scott Milligan, who will join me to deliver this session. Insa is a senior researcher at the GESIS Department of Survey Data Curation and a member of the Research Data Center International Social Survey Program, where she is responsible for the data integration and accumulation of the International Social Survey Program data. Her research and publications deal with cross-national comparability and measurement instruments. Scott is a researcher at the GESIS Department of Survey Data Curation. He is a member of the Research Data Center International Social Survey Program, where he works on data harmonization. His research examines social and economic inequality in cross-national comparison and applied statistical methodology. I am a reader in sociology at Manchester Metropolitan University. I am a quantitative sociologist with an interest in measuring children's and young people's well-being. I am interested in defining and developing reliable and valid survey instruments suitable for children and young people and cross-national comparative research. This is the first of the two workshops that we plan to run on harmonization of child well-being data. The first workshop will focus on the theoretical and conceptual understanding of data harmonization and introduce to you a database and harmonization toolbox. The second workshop will focus on how to conduct harmonization using the methods described in the harmonization toolbox. For smooth delivery, we have divided our workshop into three parts. In the first part, I will briefly talk about research and policy context of running this workshop. I will then describe the conceptual and measurement debates linked to child well-being research. In the second part, my colleague Insa will talk about harmonization strategies. And in the final part of this workshop, my colleague Scott will introduce child well-being database and harmonization toolbox. The overall aim of this workshop is to give a demonstration on harmonization in the context of child well-being research. The specific objectives are as follows. Introduce the concept of child well-being, highlighting the debates around its definition and measurement. Discuss the importance of harmonization in the context of child well-being research and policy. Introduce the concept of harmonization, including its types. Discuss harmonization strategies and their applicability. Present a comprehensive child well-being research database. And launch a harmonization toolbox developed in this research project to help researchers interested in cross-national comparative and longitudinal research. Now, I'd like to explain the wider context of this workshop. We are running this workshop as part of the European research project called Cohort Community Research and Development Infrastructure Network for Access Throughout Europe. This workshop is a deliverable of the work package 4 called Harmonization in that project. This research project received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. It brings together 22 partners from 14 countries who will initiate the community of researchers and organizations that will drive forward the coordinated development of comparative birth cohort panel survey research in Europe. You can get further information about this research project by visiting its website shown in this slide. Now, I will explain briefly the concept of harmonization. Harmonization broadly refers to procedures used to achieve or improve the comparability of survey measures collected across multiple comparative cross-national or longitudinal surveys. Researchers suggest that harmonization can be applied during any part of the survey life cycle, including study design, choice of indicators, question wording, translation, adaptation, questionnaire design, sampling, data collection, data coding, data editing, or documentation. My colleague Insa will elaborate this aspect later in her part of this workshop. To understand the importance of harmonization in child well-being research context, we need to know the policy context of research on children's well-being. Promoting children's well-being is vital for children to have a good childhood and is the basis for future well-being as adults. The aspiration to secure the well-being of children is explicit in the grand challenges such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Among the 169 targets attached to them, 95 are directly or indirectly connected to children. The Sustainable Development Goals can only deliver on the premise of equity if the world knows which children and families are thriving and which are left behind. Improving the health and well-being of children and young people is a policy priority for the European Union. Now, I am going to explain the research context of harmonization on children's well-being. Reflecting on a national level, reflecting a drive on the national level to develop policies for children focusing on their well-being, there has been an increasing number of child well-being surveys at national and cross-European levels. From a research point of view, the value of such data increases dramatically if the data originally collected for national research becomes available for truly comparative analysis. In the past 40 years, data harmonization has a wide set of procedures that aim to achieve or at least improve the comparability of surveys over time and over country borders has become an integral part of producing data that can ascertain whether a certain trend or behavior is specific to culture, cohort, period, or even study program. Some pioneering examples of harmonization relevant to the wider field include the Luxembourg Income Study, the Integrated Public Use Micro Data Series, the Cross-National Equivalent File of Household Panel Surveys, the International File of Immigrant Surveys, Democratic Values and Protest Behavior Project, the comparison of longitudinal European studies on aging, etc. These projects have demonstrated that data harmonization for life course related data is feasible and fruitful. However, in the specific field of survey-based child and youth well-being measures, no such established projects exist. The harmonization work package in the current coordinate project is developed to fill these gaps. The Child Wellbeing Database and Harmonization Toolbox that we have prepared in this project will help both researchers and policymakers. Now, I'd like to emphasize on conceptual and measurement aspects of child well-being. First, the definitional issues. The concept of well-being has been used in many different contexts, and despite substantial academic and policy interest in well-being over the decades, there is no universally accepted definition of the concept. In academic literature, it is used as an overarching concept to refer to the quality of life of children in society. According to Diener and colleagues, children's child well-being refers to children's evaluations of their lives, the degree to which their thoughtful appraisals and effective reactions indicate that their lives are desirable and proceeding well. Now, I'd like to use this slide to introduce some debates around the definition of well-being. In defining the concept of well-being, a distinction is also made between the hedonic and eudaimonic approaches. Scholars influenced by the hedonic approach view well-being in terms of subjective happiness and the experience of pleasures versus displeasure, broadly construed to include all judgments about the good or bad elements of life. Although there are many ways to evaluate the pleasure pain continuum in human experience, most research within the new hedonic psychology has used assessment of subjective well-being. Subjective well-being consists of three components: life satisfaction, high levels of positive affect, and low levels of negative affect, together often summarized as happiness. It is worth noting that high level of subjective well-being is not assumed to develop from the absence of negative mood, but from a positive balance of negative and positive mood. On the other hand, the eudaimonic approach maintains that not all desires, not all outcomes that a person might value would yield well-being when achieved. It focuses on meaning and self-realization and defines well-being in terms of the degree to which a person is fully functioning. Rife and Singer have explored the question of well-being in the context of developing a lifespan theory of human flourishing. Rife and Case spoke of psychological well-being as distinct from subjective well-being and presented a multidimensional approach to the measurement of psychological well-being that taps 6 distinct aspects of human actualization. These are autonomy, personal growth, self-acceptance, life purpose, mastery, and positive relatedness. Although there is much debate among the followers of these two approaches, evidence from several investigators such as Biswas Diener, Proctor, has indicated that well-being is probably best conceived as a multidimensional phenomenon that includes both hedonic and eudaimonic elements. Now, I'm going to talk about the measurement-related debates. In the literature, well-being is measured using both objective and subjective measures. Objective measures of social reality are those which are not filtered by perceptions and are independent of personal evaluations. On the other hand, subjective measures are supposed to explicitly express subjective states such as perceptions, assessments, and preferences, for example. The use of objective measures such as gross domestic product, household income, household wealth and income distribution, life expectancy are well established in research on children and young people's well-being. While such indicators are important to begin to redress issues of inequalities and social exclusion which negatively impact children's health and well-being, they tend to ignore the potential attributes and strengths of children. There is a growing consensus in support of considering subjective well-being as necessary complement to objective indicators, and they together can create a rounded picture of the condition of the well-being. In this slide, the debates of objective and subjective measures of well-being are explained by using the educational domain of well-being as an example. If objective measurement is used in examining educational well-being of children, then some key indicators could be school participation measured by enrollment, literacy level measured by reading skills. On the contrary, if subjective measurement is used for examining the same educational well-being domain, researchers would be interested in developing a single item rating scale asking children how well they feel they are doing at school at the moment. The answer could be uh, 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 could range from very well to not well at all. In this regard, a multiple item scale measuring children's satisfaction at school could also be another option. You will see that this kind of subjective measures of well-being are commonly used in larger scale surveys among children and young people. And later in the workshop, we will introduce some of those measures. In this slide, you see a list of selected literature on child well-being. You can have a look at some of those literature to develop further understanding around the definition and measurement of child well-being. So this is the end of the first component of workshop 1. To sum up, this component discusses the importance of harmonization in the context of child well-being research and policy. It also introduces the concept of child well-being by highlighting the debates around the definition and measurement of well-being. I will now hand over the session to my colleague Insa, who will deliver component 2 of this workshop, in which she will talk about harmonization strategies. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Insa, and in this part of the workshop, I'd like to introduce you to the basic ideas, challenges, strategies, and consequences of survey data harmonization. As Haridhan has already explained, harmonization in international social research is an approach to increase comparability. It takes place at different time points. Harmonization efforts prior to data collection are called ex-ante harmonization. In the case of international survey, that means making sure that respondents in different countries are asked the very same things in the very same way. If data has already been collected and the outcome needs to be made comparable, we speak of ex-post harmonization. But harmonization also takes place on different levels. In some cases, it might be necessary to harmonize on the concept level. And that is the case if we have different surveys that ask different questions to measure the same concept. On the variable level, you have similar single questions that need to be harmonized. And what we are dealing with in the Coordinate project and in these workshops is ex-post harmonization on the variable level. That means we are taking data from different questions on child well-being, from different surveys, and make them comparable. But the first step in this process always needs to be the evaluation of similarity. And 3 dimensions must be evaluated here. And the first is the cultural context. So does the very same question measure the very same concept in different cultural contexts? The second is the wording of questions and response options. Is the wording similar enough? And in case of international comparative studies, there must also be the question, has it been translated or not? And here it might be necessary to check the original questions and in case of doubt, maybe even with the help of a language expert. The third are the scales, when the question wording is similar, but the response scales differ. Now, for each of the dimensions, I prepared an example for you. What could be the situation when data cannot be harmonized because of the cultural context? These are response categories on a classical background variable in demography and Western surveys asking for cohabitation. So, but what if the concept of a cohabitation, that means living together without legal marriage, officially, and I stress that, officially, does not exist in a country? What kind of responses do you get in this case? Even if people had a partner without being married, they might not feel comfortable saying so in front of an interviewer. And what kind of conclusions are researchers supposed to draw from this data? So I would say such data would not be harmonizable. The example of wording, here are 3 questions on well-being. And as you can see, the wording differs. The first question asks, if you were to consider your life in general these days, how happy or unhappy would you say you are? Second question asks for a concrete time period. Think about the last 2 weeks. How often have you experienced this? Felt unhappy? And question number 3 asks, how satisfied are you with your life in general? So the first 2 questions differ in the time period. This is which is asked for here, and the last one asks for satisfaction instead of happiness. And now it would be on you to decide, is that similar enough for harmonization or not? The focus on our Coordinate project context is scale harmonization. So think of survey questions from different surveys with the very same question text, but response scales that are symmetric but differ in their number of response options. What you need then is a common target scale. And usually that's an 11-point scale ranging from 0 to 10. But how would you place values of a 4-point verbal scale on an 11-point numeric scale? And there are different approaches. One approach is the semantic judgment. Here, judges rate the verbal labels of response options and assign them to a number on the target scale. And then the average rating is kept. The disadvantage is that you need at least 3 judges per language or even per culture, and that can become very expensive if it's done accurately, depending on how many variables you want to look at. A classical, rather technical way is the linear stretch method. Here, response options are stretched to the larger scale in such a way that the lowest response option is assigned to the lowest value and the highest option to the highest value on the target scale, and all immediate options are given equally distanced numbers in between. So here the 4-point scale would end up, here the 5-point scale, and here the 7-point scale. The weakness of this method is its basic assumption, and that is that the distances between the scale points are equal irrespective of the measurement instrument. That means it assumes that respondents would choose their response options and treat the extremes the very same way, irrespective of being offered a 4-point, a 5-point, or a 7-point scale, or even answer the same way if there is a middle category offered, such as neither nor, which kind of gives the respondents the option not to choose. And we know that this is not the case. Response behavior differs depending on the scale that is offered. Therefore, there are transformation methods that do not merely concentrate on the scale points, but are based on the distribution of responses. Linear equating is such a harmonization process. But it makes only sense when your data is based on the very same population, ideally even on the same sample. And all original variables need to be normally distributed. So these could be the normally distributed responses on a 4-point scale, a 5-point scale, a 7-point scale, and an 11-point scale, in this case with existing data. Now, to harmonize the distribution, the first step is to align the mean, like this. And the second step then is to align the standard deviation to account for the different scale points, but at the same time keep the respondent's relative position on the scale. A related harmonization method is based on the Equipercentile Equating idea. So what if you theoretically have the same scale, but a very different usage across countries? For example, in case of income, when you have different currencies. What you can see here is an example on real survey data from the ISSP, the International Social Survey Program of 2020. And the data comes from Iceland, Sweden, and Thailand. You can see here that the minimum is the same in all 3 countries, because there are always cases that claim to have no household income at all. But then the distribution differs a lot. In Iceland, the household income ranges between 50,000 to 16 million Icelandic krona, while in Sweden, the range starts much lower at 1,400 Swedish krona, and then only up to 900,000 Swedish krona. In Thailand, it starts even lower with 600 baht up to 10 million baht. So as you can see, the distribution is very different across countries, but each respondent has a relative position in the representative sample according to the cumulated percent. And these positions then can be compared either by reporting the percentiles themselves or by creating cumulated categories such as deciles. Okay, So what I have introduced here very shortly are some general methods of harmonization. All of them have close relatives that have further developed the measures, maybe for certain specific types of data, but they are all based on the same core ideas. Now, which one is the right strategy to choose? First of all, one that's possible with the data you want to work with. If you harmonize data from different populations that were collected with different scales with the linear stretch method, you might introduce a bias that you then cannot distinguish from real differences in populations. But if the data comes from different populations, you cannot apply an equating procedure. Another relevant consideration is which purpose is the variable supposed to serve. You might want to create a rough control variable or a very detailed substantial variable. And depending on this, you might want to go for harmonizing more data with a rougher approach or concentrating on less data using a more precise approach. So, what applies to every approach in science is be mindful of each approach's limitations before you apply it and draw conclusions from the data. And also check analysis results with the data before and after harmonization. But this is something we are going to tell you more about in the second workshop. If you are interested in further or more advanced harmonization methods, you might want to check out this literature. And having said that, I'm passing over to Scott.
Thank you, Insa. We have developed 2 tools to give researchers and other interested parties the ability to find and harmonize child well-being data. We believe that through effective data usage and harmonization, we can unlock invaluable insights and lead to increased well-being for children. So today I'll be presenting these 2 tools, the Database of Child Well-being Indicators and the Harmonization Toolbox. So our aim in producing these 2 resources was to develop a central database of child and youth well-being measures. We wanted to identify and help ease access to key longitudinal and cross-sectional primarily European comparative surveys. And we organized the data into literature-based core concepts, which I'll explain momentarily. These were developed by the OECD, but adapted to fit our project's aims. And we took a holistic approach that we intended to aid evidence-based policy development. We followed this strategy here in developing the database. We first looked at and identified the existing data sources and stakeholders that are collecting children's well-being data. We analyzed the data collection methods that were stated in the documentation from the data providers, the measurement tools that were used, and the storage formats that were used. We considered the standardization of each of the data sources, as well as the variables by examining common definitions for different concepts, the metrics that were specifically used, and the data formats across the different sources. And we had a continual process of evaluation and monitoring of the harmonization process so that it can be improved as it was ongoing and hopefully into the future as well. So in order to identify the central child well-being database variables, we looked at several aspects of children's well-being. We placed the well-being indicators into outcomes. So these are things like material outcomes, the physical health, the social, emotional, and cultural outcomes, as well as cognitive and educational outcomes of children and youth. What activities children are doing in their day-to-day lives, what relationships and behaviors are important to them, from the family to health, social, leisure, civil, and also in the digital and online world. What settings all of these things take place in, so the family, the home, the school, and the community, as well as the public policy conditions that exist in different contexts, such as family policies, housing, health, educational, environmental policies. So based on that variable identification, we took the variables that we identified and placed them into the following categories. So material well-being, education, health and safety, family and environment, risk, behavior and lifestyle, and finally, subjective well-being measures. The database itself contains metadata for several variables in each category. And we include, so the metadata that we include are the question text for each variable, the measurement level of each variable, the perspective that is taken, so whether it's from the child or the parent or both, the age range of the children who are being asked about or directly asked and surveyed, the geographical coverage of the data set, whether it's which country it is or which countries it is drawn from, the survey design, the times, and finally the time span in the case of longitudinal data sources. And then there is further technical information that's found in a separate spreadsheet that is referenced on the website, which we'll talk about in a moment. The database also describes how users can obtain each data set. So I'd like to show an example of what the database looks like and how we can potentially use it. So we will look at an extended example both today and for the following workshop, focusing on the effect of bullying on happiness. So let's say, or let's imagine, a researcher is interested in the effects of bullying on childhood happiness, but is unsure about which data are available and where to find them. What the database provides is a source for people to go to identify which data sets have the variables that the researchers are interested in. So if we click through to this following URL, we will land on a page that looks somewhat like this. You can see across the top there are three main categories: the database and how to use, and then harmonization. So the two main tools, the database and the harmonization, are on the outside, and there is a brief description about how to use these resources. So if we click through to database and then click through to subjective well-being, we will come up with a series of variables, and each variable broken down into the different data sources. So instantly what comes up is the happiness variable, and you can see underneath the British Household Panel Survey and some metadata about happiness for that variable from that data set. We were interested in victims of bullying, so we can click on the victim of bullying, and we would be taken down the page a while, and we can see here the first three that are listed are the British Household Panel Survey, the UK Household Longitudinal Study, and the Children's Worlds data set. And there's more that is listed underneath. And you can see these all if you consult the website. But here we can also see the different metadata that's involved here. So first of all, we have the question text. And in the British Household Panel Survey, the children are asked, how much do you worry about bullying at school? Then we can see that the measurement level is ordinal. The perspective is the youth, meaning that the youths are directly asked this question rather than the parents being asked or a teacher. The age range of the children who are being surveyed In this case, it's 11 to 15-year-olds. If the perspective is from the parents, the age range is related to the children rather than the parents. And so if the parents are being asked about children who are 12 to 15, then the age range here would be 12 to 15. The geographical coverage, which in this case of the British Household Panel Survey happens to be England, Scotland, and Wales. The survey design, it's a panel survey. And finally, the time span in which the data are available. In this case, it's from 1995 until 2008. And so this information is available for each of the data sources which we have identified as providing a question that falls under the heading of victim of bullying or aspects of bullying behavior. So then further variables can be identified using the database for users who are interested in that kind of a research question about the relationship of bullying on happiness. They can then use the database to locate happiness variables. They would also perhaps be interested in other co-determinants of happiness, such as positive relationships in the family or friends, socioeconomic status, and other control variables such as age and sex. So all this information is available on the data set, as well as the extended information, such as, for instance, the name of the variable specifically used in the data itself when that information was available, as well as other pertinent information and metadata that researchers might be interested in. And the instructions for this are on the website itself. So once the appropriate variables for a research project have been identified, researchers can then consult the Harmonization Toolbox to harmonize the variables from different sources. So the Harmonization Toolbox itself presents step-by-step instructions for harmonizing several of the key variables of the data set, in the database, excuse me. The harmonization is done using R, but we try to make the instructions as generalizable as possible so that they can be extended to other software in a relatively straightforward manner. The essential workflow that we use in the harmonization process is following. For each variable we want to harmonize, we gather the relevant information from each data set, we map the values together, and we aggregate them into a harmonized vector. Individual case identifiers are also used so that multiple harmonized variables can be joined back together and then analyzed in one big set. So, as Insa explained earlier, the standardized harmonization procedures that we've used here are based on the linear stretch method. We look at different response scales and then stretch them into 11-point scale ranging from 0 to 10. And we felt that the linear stretch is both a practical and a simple approach and can make the data as comparable as possible. The toolbox itself is, we envision it as a basic building block for the harmonization process. And if users are harmonizing variables that are in the harmonization toolbox, this is great because the work is more or less already done. But the process should be easily generalizable to other variables, whether or not they are in this toolbox. So users should be able to feel like they can select or add variables or other data sources according to their analytical needs and focus and modify the code accordingly. So the toolbox is organized around harmonization of selected child well-being variables. As I said, the work itself is divided into the following sections. We start with a setup and data importation. We show which R packages are needed for each harmonization step and how to import variables from different formats, primarily from SPSS and Stata, which are the dominant formats of data storage that are used. And then this is followed by the preparation and inspection of variables. We create a code books with the value coding from the different data sets and examine the output to help guide the harmonization process and make decisions about how and whether variables can be harmonized. And then finally, the actual data harmonization process. So as mentioned, the toolbox uses the linear stretch harmonization method. As I said, the software that is used in the toolbox is R, but this can be extended to either other software or to other variables. So now we can see what the toolbox actually looks like. So the landing page includes a brief description of harmonization as we understand it, and then if you click or hover over the harmonization menu, you can see the different variables that we here have included as harmonized, and obviously we might select the bullying variable to see how the bullying variable was or is or should be harmonized. That's an introduction to the harmonization toolbox. In the following workshop, we will present the details of the harmonization process in more detail. We'll go over all of the code that is needed to harmonize the variable using the running example that we explained earlier of the effect of childhood bullying on happiness. If you're interested, here are some related research and literature that can be consulted. And otherwise, thanks for your time, and I hope to see you in the next workshop. Thank you.